A really funny thing happened when I was trying to make the thumbnails for the Montreal Tampa Bay videos and streams as the final series was going on. While I was looking at all the thumbnails and the PNG images and the cutouts that I have made of players, I recognized a whole bunch of the previous images that ended up being used. And I was like, I've seen this image of Steven Stamkos before. I've seen this image of Killorn before. Where have we used these images before? And as a result, I ended up looking up a few of the other Lightning videos that we had done on this YouTube channel spanning back the past few months, and I stumbled upon this thing right here. This video right here goes over a subject that I honestly really hate to talk about, but because it's kind of funny, I wanted to bring it back up here because we're 1 year later from the time this entire idea had been brought up, and a lot has happened since this video. Particularly the Stanley Cup Finals between the Habs and the Lightning, which is kind of coincidental with the contents of the video that we made a year ago. So what exactly were in the contents of that video, and what was that whole discussion about? Well, let's take a little bit of a journey to NHL Watcher's Twitter account to a post that he made back in September of 2020. He had himself a tweet here that talks about RDS, the French version of TSN over there in Quebec, and a segment they did on their show where they were playing fantasy trades. The header for this graphic they posted translates to, "If I were Marc Bergevin." C.A.T. Bergevin, here is une autre affaire. This is the trade proposal that the guys on RDS had a year ago. And it's quite the big one, isn't it? Montreal would send to Tampa Bay Brendan Gallagher, Phillip Danault, and Brett Kulak in exchange for Steven Stamkos and Alex Killorn. And I want you to process that a little bit before we actually move forward. Stamkos and Killorn for Gallager, Danault, and Kulak. Now, I'm going to talk about this trade idea in two ways. Firstly, I want to talk about what people were thinking back then. Secondly, I want to talk about what people are thinking now. But before we get into any of that, why was this even mentioned on RDS in the first place, you may be thinking? Well, back in September of 2020, the Tampa Bay Lightning had recently won the Cup in the bubble. That was a pretty big deal, and as a result, a lot of people were taking a look at this team and saying, okay, that's cool, but they have Sergachev, they have Ruda, they have all these guys that they need to sign, and they have themselves a team that won a cup without Stamkos pretty much, and they're so close to the cap, it's going to be really difficult for them to keep this team together the way they had been and proceed going forward, right? It's why we had the entire, the Lightning have asked Stamkos to waive discussion going on back then as well, because reports surfaced that the Lightning had introduced the idea to Stammer, hey, so our team's kind of strapped up against the cap a little bit, and we have a lot of guys that we want to re-sign that are going to be really good. I know you're our captain, Stammer, but would you like to waive? You're making $8.5 million. That's a lot of money. If we freed up that money, we could get a lot of these other guys re-signed. And Stamkos eventually just straight up said, okay, no, I'm not waiving, I'm staying here. But those were the conversations we were having back then. Alex Killorn is included in this discussion because he's a guy making $4.4 million a season until 2023, and because if you're going to go out there and talk about a Stamkos trade elsewhere around the league to free up money for Tampa, you would have to include Killorn as well, because you need to include enough money so you can re-sign all the guys that you had. Stamkos, it was easy to see why he could be traded because they won a cup without him. Killorn because he's an additional piece. The Montreal Canadiens are being viewed in this way because, of course, if you're going to go out there as a French TV station talking about potential trades, you gotta involve the Habs somehow, and Gallagher, Danault, and Kulak was a trade that would be pretty okay in terms of the monetary value for Tampa. Back when this idea was proposed, Brendan Gallagher hadn't signed his contract extension yet, which is currently worth 6.5 AAV until 2027. Back then, however, he didn't have that extension yet, kind of a similar situation to Phillip Danault, who does still need a contract offer for next year. Kulak is included in this because Honestly, I have no idea why he's included in this. I think he's just a name that's being added on because why not? He's making 1.85 AAV until 2022, so his last year is indeed next year. But this trade back then, when it was made in 2020 of September, a lot of people looked at it and they were just like, okay, look at Habs fans, man, going out there making hypothetical trades, just getting every superstar in the market because of course they would be. RDS, man, why would you even suggest something like this? Like, of course, it's Phillip, Danault, Gallagher, and Kulak for Stamkos and Killorn. Montreal would obviously be winning. Right? And I don't want to make it seem like a year later, oh, this would be a loss of a trade for Montreal because Danault and Gallagher are so gosh darn good. But I'm just going to say it right here. This trade idea, honestly, I kind of perceive it a bit differently today than I did a year ago. Last year, the uncertainties with Steven Stamkos because of the fact that he didn't play the entire playoffs were kind of bringing his value down in a way. But today, take a look at what happened in the postseason. Steven Stamkos had himself 18 points in 23 games. Now, granted, he was scoreless in the last 4 games against Montreal of the playoffs. Alex Killorn, similar boat. He had 19 games played, he had 17 points, so a whole bunch of production coming from these two guys. It's kind of like, okay, if you cut and paste Stamkos and Killorn and put them on Montreal, sure, you might score a whole bunch more goals, but you have to take a look at what exactly it is you're giving up. Because even though the return in this situation, Gallagher and Danault did not produce nearly the same amount of points as Killorn and Stamkos did, this Habs team would be a lot different if we didn't have Gallagher and or Danault. Like, I don't even know if the Habs make it past the first round without Danault. Maybe the second round, or the third round even. Phillip Danault is part of the entire reason the Habs were able to shut down Mark Stone. Sure, Brendan Gallagher came out here and he only had 6 points in 22 games in the postseason. That's bad. Like, that's legitimately bad. But you can't say that he was a bad player on this team. Because he provided that spark, he provided that grit, and he provided that heart that the team thrived off of. Take a look at Phillip Danault as well. He had himself 4 points in 22 games. On paper, that was really, really bad. But that still was such an important contribution to the entire core that the Habs had in this playoff run. So, even though Killorn and Stamkos statistically would provide a whole bunch of offense, I don't know if cutting out Gallagher and Danault and replacing them with those Tampa Bay guys would make the team a significantly huge amount better. You know? Like, the Habs are just not that kind of team that thrives off of offense and goes out there and gets 5 guys in the top 5 of playoff scoring like the Lightning are, so it's a different kind of identity, and it's a different formula for winning. I'd been noting this the entire time throughout the playoffs, but the Habs, they don't really win games 5-4, or 5-3, or 6-3, or whatever. They win their games 1-0, 2-1, 3-2 in overtime. They win the tight, gritty, checking games, and guys like Gallagher and Danault really help out in that department. Kulak is an extra defenseman to be added onto this because of course he would be, but still, Stamkos and Killorn, for how good they are, for the system that Montreal plays, I just don't know how good it would mesh. I know Montreal would be a lot better if they had a whole bunch more goals, but what happens to the shutdown line then if you have Stamkos and Killorn instead of Gallagher and Danault? Gallagher and Danault were kind of glued together at the hip the entire postseason on the same line. So all of a sudden that entire defensive presence is kind of gone, and you have to rely on Evans and Lehkonen and Armia, and I guess Stamkos and Killorn to get the job done defensively. And I don't know about you, but if I'm playing Steven Stamkos and I'm telling him, okay, go out there and make sure you shut down Mark Stone. We don't care how many goals you get, just shut down Stone. That's the wrong way to use a guy like Stamkos. So 1 year later, even though this trade idea is so lopsided in terms of value of production and goals and assists, Stamkos and Killorn for Danault, Gallagher, and Kulak, I personally don't know if it would be a trade that the Montreal Canadiens would really benefit from. Even taking out the factors of Danault needing a contract and Kulak expiring next year and all that, this trade idea by RDS was just brought up as a potential proposal a year ago when we were uncertain about Stamkos and he was in a position where he might have been asked to waive and all that, and they were just suggesting, okay, if Bergevin's gonna go out there and talk to Tampa because Stamkos may be on the block, this is an offer. Danault, Gallagher, Kulak. Let's see it. So talk to me in the comments what you thought about this entire idea over here. I get it, it's a year old, but I thought it would be really interesting to bring up because these teams just met in the finals. And if you tried to swap the situations of the players and the teams, I think you could have some really interesting thought experiments. This was my thoughts over here. I don't think it really would be all too great for the Habs. As for the Lightning, I mean, they would still have Kucherov and Hedman and Point and whatever, so I think they would be fine. But talk to me in the comments either way what you think. I hope you enjoyed this video. Ash Rolls 99. And bye.